Wubba lubba dub dub! This literally has nothing to do with this video. My boyfriend just found his Rick costume yesterday and the wig matches my shirt, so I was like, hey, why not wear it for no reason? Let's talk about the best books that I read in 2019. So we have a lot of books to talk about today, which I'm very excited about, and I just wanted to clarify that this isn't necessarily the best books that came out in 2019. However, of this stack, these ones did come out in 2019. Apparently I enjoyed a lot of the 2019 releases I read. So let's get started. The best books I read. First up, we have A Curse So Dark and Lonely by Bridget Kammerer. This is the first in a series, and it is a Beauty and the Beast retelling. I love that this still felt quite familiar, but I like the directions it took, the ways in which it did diverge from the fairy tale that we're familiar with. We have Prince Ren, who lives in Emberfall, which is kind of like kingdoms, castles, set back in ye olde days, sort of like more along those lines. And then we have Harper, who lives in Washington, DC. She certainly has not had an easy life, and she's thrown into a situation which is rather difficult to deal with and adjust, because she's walking the streets one day when she sees a girl being attacked, and she decides to go over and help this girl. As a result of this, she gets transported from the world we know into Emberfall, and she's kind of sucked into Ren's world and gets entangled in his life and in the curse. The best thing about this book for me was certainly the characters. I loved Harper, I loved her stubbornness, her bravery, and just willing to do the right thing. Even in a completely foreign situation where she's very much out of her element, she still is really willing to step up and do the right thing. We also get to see some disability representation with Harper. She has cerebral palsy, and I can't speak on the representation myself, but I will actually leave a link in the description below to an Own Voices review by my lovely friend Maisie. She adored this book and had a really emotional experience reading it, and she shows all of that in the review, so please go and check that out if you want to see a little bit more about the representation itself. But I loved seeing a disabled main character, and it was very interesting seeing the way people treated her based on appearances alone. And there were some really, really interesting conversations that came up about that. And Harper's like, don't judge me and what I can do at face value. She is strong and brave and wonderful. So we have Harper. I also really loved Grey. The dynamic between Harper and Grey was so fascinating, so wonderful. Sadie by Courtney Summers. So this one certainly made the rounds in BookTube in 2018 when it came out, and I was definitely interested in picking this up. I didn't know anything about the story. I just heard so many people talking about Sadie, saying how wonderful it was, and also the fact that the audiobook was spectacular and you should listen to it because half of it is formatted as a podcast, which obviously really lends itself to the audio format. I got gifted this. I actually got gifted a couple of copies, so obviously like so many people have read and loved this and wanted me to read it as well. Finally did it. It was a really wild ride. If you haven't yet jumped on the bandwagon and know nothing about Sadie, this is about a girl named Sadie who disappears, and half of the book is from her perspective. You find out why she ran away and her journey to basically seek revenge to what happened to her little sister. And then the other half of the book is the podcast. There is this radio host who stumbles across this missing persons case about Sadie and becomes really fascinated by it and wants to dig deeper and discover what happened. I think this was so well done. I was so captivated, so drawn in. It was really interesting, obviously knowing what's happening with Sadie, but then hearing from West about like the clues he's found and what he thinks they mean. So the comparisons between these two was just so interesting. Would thoroughly recommend this one. It was gripping, it was captivating, it was really entertaining, especially on audio format. If you have access to the audiobook through whatever platform, Audible, Scribed, your library, if you can find it, I would recommend it. Next, we have Night of Cake and Puppets by Laini Taylor. So about this one. Okay, so in 2019, my friends and I did a read along for the Daughter of Smoke and Bone trilogy. It was a solid read, but my favorite characters from the trilogy were Mick and Susanna. So Susanna is Karoo, the main character of the Daughter of Smoke and Bone trilogy's best friend. She has a crush on this guy called Mick, and they eventually get together. But you don't know exactly the details of how that happened. Like, you hear that Susanna basically set out a bit of a treasure hunt for Mick. They were the best thing about the entire series, in my opinion. Like, I loved their relationship. They're so sweet, they're so in love with each other, and they're hilarious. The banter she has with so many different people, oh, it was golden. Her moments in the trilogy, the best. But the one thing that I wanted to know was how exactly this treasure hunt played out. And that's where Night of Cake and Puppets comes in. You see in all of the detail how this night unfolds. It made me so happy. This was pure cuteness, pure joy. It was beautiful, wonderful, utterly romantic. I mean, it'll definitely blow your expectations out of proportion for what romance should be because it's so good. Middle Game by Seanan McGuire. So this, I knew that I was going to enjoy this one. I knew it. Damn, it became a fave. I had a lot of feelings reading this one and I enjoyed every minute of it. So we have these twins, Roger and Dodger, who were kind of created in order to embody the doctrine of ethos, which is on the very basic level, mathematics, language. Within the book, it's kind of explained as the two methods through which man has always been able to influence and even command nature. Roger and Dodger were created by a man named Reed, who essentially wants to utilize the two of them and the doctrine that they embody to gain a hell of a lot of power and control the world. You know, something I'm sure we can all relate to. Even that description I feel like doesn't really encapsulate everything I want to say about it, but I also don't want to go into too much detail because half the journey with this one is learning about what all of it means and uncovering the secrets, uncovering the mysteries. It was so good. This was amazing. I loved the incorporation of alchemy in here. I loved the discussions on humanity, what it means to be human, and is it okay to play God? And with the writing, it was just so captivating. This was just such a fascinating and fun read. Like, I freaking loved it. Loved it, loved it, loved it. Not gonna lie though, there were some parts of it that took some time to wrap my head around, but it was just so interesting and I loved seeing the relationship shift and change over time between Roger and Dodger, and even the villains were super fascinating. Like, I very, very much disliked them. There's also another character, Erin, who was really interesting, and I really appreciated her as a character, her role in the story. I want to reread this so bad. Like, this is one of the books where I finished reading it, was like, can I start from the beginning again? I was really, really close to it, let me tell you, but I did have other books I had to read immediately after this, but oh my god. Masterpiece. Next, I have some graphic novels. So I have parts 1, 2, and 3 of Avatar: The Last Airbender, The Search by Jean Wen Yang. Avatar: The Last Airbender is my favorite TV show of all time. So let me tell you, I was over the moon when I discovered that there were comics set after the TV show. So I was like, I need these in my life. I did read The Promise this year as well, which I also really enjoyed, but The Search for me was what I needed. If you've watched the show, I'm sure you'll understand why, because this is about uncovering the mystery of what happened to Zuko's mother. Zuko is one of my favorite characters from the show, and his story is just the most fascinating of them all. So I was just so invested in this particular story arc. Like, I wanted desperately to know what happened to Zuko's mother. I needed to know. I don't want to go into too much detail because this is like a comic book series set after an entire TV show. Like, I don't want to dive into any spoiler territory, but I'm just so glad that I got this story. So happy. Another graphic novel that I read and adored was The Tea Dragon Society by Katie O'Neill. If you're looking for a pure, beautiful, and entirely sweet story that is just super heartwarming and will make you smile, then please read The Tea Dragon Society. This was just like eating a cupcake. It was delightful. It was a small bite. You consume it really quickly, but it was everything. It's just such a pure story. It's about this girl named Greta who is a blacksmith's apprentice. She basically discovers a lost tea dragon and takes it back to its owner, and then discovers the dying art form of tea dragon caretaking. The Tea Dragon Society used to be a lot bigger, but there's less and less people within the society now, and it's, like I said, a dying art form, which is very, very sad. But Greta kind of learns about how taking care of tea dragons has enriched the lives of these two tea shop owners, Hezekiel and Eric, and it ends up enriching her own as well, and it's so good. I just wish tea dragons were real. I want my own. There are plushies of them. I just can't afford them right now. One day one day. I also really appreciated the fact that we have such a small cast of characters, but super diverse as well. Like Hezekiel and Eric, they're in a male-male relationship. One of them is disabled. We've also got characters of color. If you want something pure and cute, this is for you. Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. So this one has been getting some interesting reviews. I really enjoyed this. So this is about Galaxy, or Alex Stern, and she goes to Yale University and joins the Ninth House, which is part of a secret society all to do with like the occult. There are basically 9 houses, 8 of them dabble in different types of magics like raising the dead, illusions, stuff like that. And then there's the 9th house, which is kind of there to overlook the rest of the houses and make sure they stay in line. So Alex kind of gets entangled in the secret societies, and one day there is a dead girl found on campus. And Alex believes there's something more sinister going on here. She thinks the societies are probably involved. Within this book, there are actually 2 timelines. So we have like the present day, which is kind of like this murder mystery, and then we also have something from the past, back when Alex had just joined Yale and the 9th house and is basically being trained by a guy named Darlington. I really enjoyed this. Now, I definitely understand a lot of people's issues or concerns with this one, especially since like the start of the book is very slow. The pace is quite meandering for a really long time. The pace does pick up though, like stakes get higher, things intensify, all that good jazz. But I honestly didn't take an issue with the pacing. I was just enjoying the ride, learning about these secret societies and also discovering more about Alex and her history and the relationship she has with Darlington, as well as other people within the societies and within the college. In terms of the magic itself, it wasn't really explained a lot, and that's definitely one thing that I kind of wanted more of because I was so fascinated by it. I wanted to know more about the secret societies and all of the secret societies, like you get a glimpse into a few of them, but the way in which all of the magic worked, I was so intrigued by it and I wanted to know more. But honestly, that didn't really hinder my enjoyment. It's just one thing that was like, I wish there was a little bit more of this here. I just kind of accepted it at face value as I was reading it, and I had a great time with that. I think my annotating of this also helped me understand the societies a little more because I had like an index card where anytime one of the secret societies was mentioned, I'd like write out a little bit more information. To be fair, I was reading the ARC, and the finished copy I do believe has information about all of the houses, which would have been super handy. I didn't have that in my proof copy, but it's in the finished copy, which is helpful if you're interested in learning a little bit more about each of the houses. But again, I was like writing lots of things as I went, marking up all the pages, being like, oh, that's an interesting piece of information. So I just had a really good time with it. And then when the pacing did pick up, I was just like, oh my God. And like, there were definitely some dark topics, some very dark scenes in here as well. Trigger warning for rape of a minor and sexual abuse. It can be quite violent and bloody at times as well. I know there's a lot more in here as well. I can't think off the top of my head some of the other triggers. I think I mentioned these on Goodreads. If you guys are interested in any of the triggers, I'll have a link in the description below. I really enjoyed this, and the ending made me realize this was a series and now I need the next book, but it's going to be a while. That's the way publishing works. It's fine. I will survive. The next 2 books I'm going to be talking about are also part of a series, which is again another super cute and super sweet story. If you're looking for a light, fluffy romance in graphic novel form, you need to read Heartstopper by Alice Oseman. Oh, these are just so good. So this follows Nick and Charlie, who, if you've read Solitaire by Alice Oseman, you will recognize these characters. I haven't read Solitaire myself, but I'm pretty sure that in Solitaire, Charlie and Nick are like a couple. And this is about how the 2 of them got together in the first place and like their romance, their story. This is an ongoing series. I'm not sure how many books are going to be in the series, but volume 3 is coming out in February. I'm so excited. It's basically about Nick and Charlie. One of them is out. The school knows that he is gay. The other one is not, but it's about the friendship and then the relationship that develops between these 2. And obviously it does cover being in a situation where one person is out and the other one isn't ready yet, but it's all really heartwarming and wonderful and beautiful, and the illustration is also just really cute. I love it. It's wholesome. It's everything I wanted. Please read it. The next book I'm going to be talking about is The Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. This behemoth of a book was so good. This is one of the books I read earlier on in the year, read it for book club, and also did a live Q&A with Samantha Shannon. So if you guys are interested in watching that, if you've also read Priory of the Orange Tree, I'll try and remember to link that in the description below. So this is an epic fantasy with a world where dragons exist. There are two different kinds of dragons. The dragons in the east are water dragons, and the people in the east kind of live more harmoniously with dragons. There are dragon riders. They have a really great relationship. There's a lot of respect between the two. And then over in the west we have like worms. So they're the dragons that you think of, the ones, the fire-breathing, scary, big, flying, terrifying, dangerous ones. I think in the past there was like a massive war with these dragons as well. And there's a particular ancient, very, very old, very, very powerful dragon who has been slumbering for a long time. And this dragon is awakening, and that's not a good sign. Not a good sign indeed. The main kind of characters of note, we have Queen Sabrin the Ninth, and she is dealing with the task of needing to conceive an heir. She must have a daughter to keep the queendom going. She's also having to deal with being in constant danger, assassins, all that fun stuff. Then we have Ede, who is an outsider but joins Queen Sabrin's court and eventually rises to the position of lady-in-waiting, and she is there to protect Sabrin, and she also has magic, which is not allowed. And then we have Tana from the east, who is training to become a dragon rider. However, she finds herself in a really uncomfortable and awkward situation which could destroy everything she's worked for. Oh, we do also have, what's his name? He's not in the synopsis, but he is one of the perspectives that we follow. The old man who's been exiled from the west and is living in the east. What's his name? Niklaes. He was also a very fascinating character who I enjoyed reading about. He definitely flawed, definitely lived an interesting life. Honestly, if there was an encyclopedia just about the world within the Priory of the Orange Tree, I would devour it. Obviously, we do discover a lot about the world in here. Like, it's a huge book. We're jumping between characters, different parts of the world on different continents, but I was still just so intrigued and could have read so much more. Though it is a good thing that more of it wasn't packed into here because it is a huge book already. But just saying, if there was like a separate book compendium of all the information, I would read it. Battery's dying. Slight change in camera position coming in 3, 2, 1. The world is just so rich, so complex. Loved learning all about the different countries, the different ways of life, the different cultures. The politics are super interesting, even the religions, and seeing the threads between these very, very different religions, but how they like all stem from the same thing. We do have a female-female romance. This is another one that I was like, I really want to reread, but I don't have the time to do this again. Not right now. So good. The last book that I'm going to be talking about today is the only one of the mix that I didn't rate 5 stars. I initially gave this 4.5, but even at the time of finishing the book, I was undecided on my rating, and I'm still undecided. I just settled on the 4.5 because reasons, I'm sure I'll mention some of them here. I did also do a full review on this one, but this is the kind of book that has just really stuck with me since finishing it. It's one of the ones that I just can't stop thinking about, and I've been, again, also wanted to immediately reread this book, and I do expect to reread this book multiple times. And I think each time I do, I will end up appreciating it even more and more because there's so much mystery, so much intrigue, and a lot of the information is fed rather slowly. So it's just going to be so fascinating to go back and reread everything with all of that knowledge and seeing how that influences my interpretation of the story, I guess. Before I go any further, that book is The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. Books that stay with me, that I still think about weeks and months after finishing it, I think is a really good indicator of not just a good book, but a book that really had an impact on me or means something to me. And this one has definitely stuck with me. We have Zachary Ezra Rawlins, who is a postgraduate. He is studying games and storytelling within games. And he is having a look through his university library one day when he discovers a book. It has a title, it's called Sweet Sorrows, but there is no author, there's no like publication information. He's trying to track down where this book came from, what it is. He starts reading it, and it's kind of a series of shorter stories, snippets of these characters or people's lives, and he stumbles across a story that hits rather close to home because it was something that happened to him in his childhood. And it's not like, oh, this is something that also happened to me when I was young. No, it's the young boy in this story was me. This is a story about something that happened to me. This is my life. Oh my gosh. Obviously, he wants more answers, and he eventually finds 3 clues. There's a bee, a sword, and a key, and these eventually lead him to the Starless Sea, which is like an underground labyrinth of stories. My kind of heaven? Yes. But it's so much more than that. Like, I don't want to go into any more detail because you need to read this and discover it all for yourself. But this was a really atmospheric, really whimsical and magical and wonderful story. I don't think it's necessarily for everybody, but it was certainly for me. I loved it. It's the kind of book where you just need to read it as it is. Don't try and dissect it as you go. Don't try and think about everything logically. Like, the pieces will come together in time. You've just got to let the story take you where it wants to take you. And I really enjoyed that. Like, it was such a unique reading experience for me. There's very few books that I've read that have really transported me out of reality. Like, obviously you get sucked into a story, but while I was reading it, I was like, I feel like I'm sitting by a fire being told a story by like my grandmother or something like that. Like, I don't know, it was just such a wonderful out-of-body experience sometimes when I was reading this, particularly towards the start. The writing is fantastic. It is beautiful, poetic, really colorful, really rich. If you're not into really flowery writing, again, probably not for you, but I loved this. Characters, again, so fascinating. We have a male-male romance in here. There's also Zach's best friend, who I believe, there's no labels, but I think she might be bi, pan, I'm not sure, no labels, like I said. She mentions being in relationships with both men and women. Really simply, this is a book about stories, and I mean really about stories. We have Zachary's story, we have the story of the Starless Sea, and interspersed, like every second chapter is a snippet from the book that Zachary finds, Sweet Sorrows, and then there's also another book that is similar to that, and then we also have some like diary entries. But all of these little snippets, these mini stories, were so intriguing, so fascinating, and I liked seeing how these eventually wove into the main story. Like, the more I think about it, the more I talk about it, I don't know how I can give this any less than 5 stars. Like, I did have not really major issues. Like, it didn't hinder my enjoyment, but I wanted more development of some of the relationships, namely between Zachary and Dorian. I feel like there was something else that I wanted more of, but I can't remember now. I think I mentioned it in my review, if you're interested. Anyway, it was beautiful, wonderful. Like, I want to very, very briefly mention / address the fact that Dark Dawn is not on this list, and I have reasons. First of all is that I didn't read it in 2019. Well, I started rereading Dark Dawn in 2019. I did not finish my reread, so because I didn't finish it, I'm not counting it as being read in 2019, therefore not putting it on the list. However, I did not mention Dark Dawn in 2018, which is when I did first read it, and the reason for that is because I couldn't talk about it. I read a very early draft of Dark Dawn before any of the proofs were out. Jay asked if I'd like to read it early and send him my critiques, so that is what I did, and I felt like I couldn't talk about it. So that's why I didn't mention it in any videos. I just want to mention that I do love Dark Dawn. It's a 5 out of 5 star read. I know that there's definitely some mixed thoughts on the final book in the series. I personally really enjoyed it. Am I biased? Maybe. Like, I'm so deep in the Nevernight world. But I just want to mention Dark Dawn. Love it. If you haven't read Nevernight yet, what are you doing? I read so many wonderful books in 2019. But here is the creme de la creme. Best of the best, my favorite books that I read in 2019. I'll try and remember to leave some links in the description below to the Goodreads pages if you want to know a little bit more information. I'll also leave some links down below to either my reviews or live show discussions or author Q&As, this one, and any other links that I find helpful. I'll try and remember to put them in the description for you. But thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. If you've shared your favorite books of 2019 in a blog, video, Instagram post, whatever, feel free to leave those linked in the description below. Always looking for more recommendations or books to bump up on my TBR pile, so love to check some of those out. Otherwise, feel free to comment down below with the best books that you read last year as well. I look forward to seeing all of your recommendations, and yeah, that's all that I have for now. So I'll see you guys very soon in a new video, but until then, I'll talk to you in the comments. Bye!